Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
On today's Your Take, I'm joined by a young professional wrestler. My guest started wrestling with Devon Junior Wrestling Alliance before going on to work on the independent circuit in the UK. He's a former unified British Tag Team Champion with partner Mark Haskins. My guest also wrestled for WWE's development territory, NXT, under the name Oliver Gray, where he was one half of the NXT Tag Team Champions, British Ambition with Adrian Neville. My guest has spent much time wrestling in Japan. He joins me today to talk about the art and entertainment spectacle of wrestling, recently becoming a father, his wrestling career, and no doubt some nostalgia, as I confess being a wrestling fan myself, having followed the WWF in the late 1980s and 1990s. We ring the bell, the championship belt up for grabs. Welcome, Joel Redman, aka Joel Pettyfer, who joins me today on Your Take. Good evening and a very warm welcome.
Good evening, and firstly, thank you for saying young wrestler, because I'm not sure that still applies, but I appreciate that.
I said young because you're younger than me, so...
Well, I don't feel young, trust me. 18 years of wrestling, you don't feel very young. But...
Many congratulations, and we'll certainly come on. It's one of my questions later about the birth of your the recent good news, so we'll come on to that slightly later in the interview. Yeah. I'm really interested to find out about your career as a wrestler, because as a wrestling fan, avid watcher of wrestling for maybe 30 years, going to live events and seeing it on the TV, I would have no clue on, the training involved, the progression from being a fan to actually doing it as a profession. So I'm interested to find out kind of how that happened. But I think to start with, it'd be good to kind of go back to the late 1980s, really, the very beginning. You were born February the 21st, 1987. And I just want to find out where you were born, where you grew up. And I just kind of want to find out a little bit of background on family life, just a bit about your parents, who are they, what they did for a living, and if you had any brothers or sisters.
Yeah, great. I was born in Tiverton in Devon, which is a little sort of farming town in the middle of Devon. It's good stories, really. My granddad was born in India. His parents were in the military there. When he was young, they sent him back to England. He went to Cambridge University and got a degree in mathematics. And they offered him sort of very good jobs in London, but he just had his heart set on being a farmer. So him and a friend bought an old car and a sort of bogland for a farm in the middle of Devon, and they moved down there and started farming it. And then obviously my dad farmed it after that. And, I just grew up on a farm as a farm kid. As a kid, we grew up on a house sort of up a dirt track away from the farm. We didn't have any sort of electric and stuff with a generator, and didn't have TV when I was a kid for a long time. And it really is the middle of nowhere. I mean, the lane to the farm is, I think, 2.5 miles. And then you're talking another half mile dirt track, and my parents say when it used to rain heavy, the stream would flood, and they'd have to get a rowing boat and row across the stream to get to the shops. They couldn't even drive. So
wow.
It really is the wilderness. So as a kid, you hate it because you want to be with your mates in the town, going to the cinema or something. But, as an older adult now, it's a hell of a place to go back and visit and spend time there.
You've kind of given us a little bit of background on family life, where you grew up. I wanted to come on to kind of your schooling, like where did you go to school? And after your kind of 5 years at senior school, did you go on to further education? And at a young age, did you have any kind of career aspirations when you were sort of in your teen years?
So me and my sister went to Mortshire Bishop Primary School, which is, again, a tiny little village in Devon. Then I went to Cholmondeley Community College, which is another very, very small college. I went to an East Devon College in Tiverton afterwards, did media studies there. I didn't have an ambition, I don't think, to do media. It was just the course, I guess, that I fell into. And I never went to uni. I got offered a place in university, and I sort of started wrestling at the same time. And I sort of turned down the university to move to Portsmouth to go and train to be a wrestler and live there with another guy called Mark Haskins. Whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. You know, my wrestling career has been, I had good fun, I've had a lot of good experiences, but I haven't got a lot of qualifications behind me, which is good and a bad thing. You know, like you can still work your way up in business without qualifications, I think. But I probably, in hindsight, with my son now, Ted, I'd probably encourage him to go to university, get good grades, get something behind him, and then if he wanted to wrestle or do sport, he could pursue that afterwards. But it is what it is.
I think it's interesting because you mentioned just a moment ago about your upbringing and that you were kind of cut away from like most cultural things, like simple things like the television, gaming, things like that, living in kind of a rural area. It kind of leads on perfectly to my next question, because I was going to ask you when you first encountered wrestling and which kind of organizations were you watching on television, I presume, and who were kind of your favorite wrestlers that you first encountered?
Well, I never watched wrestling as a kid because, like I said, we didn't have a TV for a long time. And I never played video games. Like, I've never been into them, which may be a good or a bad thing. So I think my first experience with wrestling was probably having a Royal Rumble on Cholmondeley rugby ground football pitch or something. All the boys, I think we used to wrestle in the classrooms, but then I had a sort of idea what it was, and I started watching Sunday Night Heat on Channel 4 because we didn't have Sky or anything. And then my neighbours were Chris and Sam Andrews, and they wrestled as well. And Chris was a really good wrestler. They've both given up now. But I used to go over to their place and walk across the hill to their farm. And they'd have Sky, so we'd stay up and watch the pay-per-views at the early hours of the morning. So that was my introduction to it. I mean, before that, I think maybe I'd watched one wrestling on TV, and then I went to the Corn Exchange in Exeter and I watched it live. And I watched a live pro wrestling event at a very young age, which was quite a good way of getting used to the business, I guess, by seeing it in person. But yeah, I was never a wrestling fan as a kid. My dad played rugby. He was a really good rugby player. So I think he didn't push me to play rugby, but he liked me to play rugby. So I did play that for a long, long time. Eventually I gave that up to wrestle, which was kind of maybe difficult for him in a way because he'd always seen me as being a rugby player like he was. But I remember sort of stopped playing rugby, and they couldn't understand why I wanted to do this wrestling thing because they're farmers from Devon. They got wrestling is foreign to any kind of farmer in Devon. And then when I was 19 or 20, I did a show for Pro Wrestling Noah in the Coventry Sky Dome. There's about 5,000 people in the crowd, and I got them some seats in the bleacher seats, and they just sat and watched that, and they saw how many people were there, and I did a 20-minute time limit draw in the opener, and they were like, okay, yeah, you know what you're doing with this, you could make something of this, and that was quite a good moment for me.
I smiled when you were kind of retelling the stories at school and the playground, reenacting Royal Rumbles and so on, because I can totally identify with that completely.
Oh, we've all done that. We're that generation. Wrestling was so popular. Late 90s wrestling was such a boom period, and it was so good back then that everyone was into it. When you had Stone Cold and The Rock and these kind of wrestlers, it was a real cool thing to watch, and it was kind of risky at the time. The product they put out then, your parents wouldn't want you watching, so it was quite sneaky to be able to watch that pay-per-views in the morning and stuff. So yeah, it was really cool. And then you mentioned the Devon Junior Wrestling Association, I think it was. That wasn't the company. That was us in the hay bales, messing around on hay bales. We had some hay bales and some tyres and a tarpaulin. And there was 4 RSJs and an old barn. We used to put some ropes up, and that was just us playing around. So that, that was the first sort of start, really, for our wrestling.
I wanted to ask you mentioned about starting wrestling and kind of your parents initially kind of had this, didn't approve and so forth. I wanted to talk about, before you got into wrestling, what kind of jobs did you do before becoming a professional wrestler? And at what stage did it kind of dawn on you that that's what you wanted to do as a career, make a living from it and do it as a kind of full-time thing?
Probably at an early age, as soon as I sort of saw it, I liked it and I wanted to do it. I started wrestling at 15, it was like training, and my first match was 16. So, I started very, very young. So I didn't have many career aspirations before that. I think I wanted to be a marine biologist for some reason when I was a kid. I have no idea because I can't even swim very well. But anyway, I didn't have, I just wanted to be a wrestler, and I was a massive Kurt Angle fan. And I didn't have any amateur wrestling schools nearby, so I did judo for years. That was my thing. I would just do judo when I was a young kid, which helped me a lot with my wrestling. And then, when I was 15, I started training sort of professionally in Exeter. It was meant to be a school opening up, and the guy who was going to open it just decided not to in the last second. So I contacted the company that were going to be doing it, and I said, I'll manage it, sort of thing, even though I was only a kid. And we'd all chip money in, and we'd rent out like a little room in a leisure centre, and we'd pay wrestlers to come down and teach us. So that was how I started learning how to wrestle. And then at 16, I went on the holiday camp circuit in England, which at that time was 9 weeks, and you just wrestle every day for 9 weeks. I wouldn't wrestle at that age. I'd be carrying the bags or a referee or something, but they'd teach me stuff before the matches. They'd get me in the ring and sort of rough me up a little bit and show me a few holes. But that's how I started, which is good. A lot of wrestlers nowadays, they go through training schools. So they've been training at school for 3 or 4 years, and then they get on shows. Whereas I kind of started on the job. I didn't really know how to wrestle, but I was just helping out backstage, and I'd get in the ring with the guys that have been doing it for like 20 years, and they just show me a few little tricks. And it was a good way of starting. It's kind of the old school way of doing it, but I was lucky to have had that upbringing.
Leading on to your career, I wanted to talk about some of the early promotions you worked for on the kind of UK independent wrestling scene. And you kind of touched upon it already, but I kind of just want to ask you what you learned in kind of those early days about the kind of art of wrestling, and also about the business side as well. And how did you kind of develop your skills inside the ring? Because you mentioned you didn't kind of go through sort of a training academy. Was it just a question of just learning from other people and so forth?
I think so. I think the judo helped me a lot. And those wrestlers that were teaching me down on those camps, because it was that sort of old school way of doing things. But if you go back to wrestling when it was really popular in England in like the 70s and 80s, it was like a real shut door thing. And if you wanted to be a wrestler, it was all treated like it was completely real. So if you went to try out, they'd just beat you up. That was like, because they didn't want to let anyone know that it wasn't real. It was never meant to be a performance. American wrestling kind of admitted that it was choreographed and it was performance. So I wouldn't say I got beaten up. That sounds a bit rough, but I definitely got a few black eyes and split lips and stuff. But I think that probably helped me in the long run, because it makes you understand how to actually wrestle and control people, or say how to sell a punch, right? So we call it selling if you pretend you're hurt. So if a guy punches you and you want to pretend that it's hurt, that's quite hard to do unless you've been punched. If you've never been punched before, it's difficult to know what that feels like. If you've been punched a few times when you're training by these older guys, you're like, well, I kind of know how to react to this. And it was a good way of starting. But so, that was it. But early companies that I worked for, so those camps, but that was kind of independent stuff. And then I started wrestling for the FWA Academy. So the FWA was a big company at the time, and I was working for their academy. I wasn't never trained there. I just go up and do the shows. And I was a terrible wrestler when I started, but they kind of, I guess, saw something in me. And Mark Sloan, who was the coach there, just kind of nurtured me a little bit. And eventually I went to train with him for a couple of years, and I lived in Portsmouth. And then it was like IPW UK and all this kind of stuff around that era. But British wrestling boomed, in the last 5 years. It wasn't as big as it was back then. There wasn't that many companies. There was AllStar Wrestling, who I work for now, and they were the biggest, and they were top dogs. And I used to do a couple of shows for them every here and there, like when I was a teenager, but it was very sporadic. I was far too small and nowhere near experienced enough to be a sort of mainstay with them.
I kind of initially got into wrestling in the late, probably 1980s, early 90s, and kind of was an avid follower when it was on Sky and all the pay-per-view events. But kind of when I look back in hindsight, like 30 years on, I think one of the things I enjoyed the most was the backstories, the writers who were kind of writing the material. It was almost it was almost like a soap opera in a way, that you had to kind of follow episode to episode.
Exactly what it is. People ask me, you don't know what wrestling is, and I tell them I'm a wrestler, and they don't know what it is. They're trying to get me to explain what it is to them. And I'm like, well, it's just pantomime. It's exactly like pantomime. It's EastEnders, it's exactly what wrestling is. It's just like a story. It's like theatre. And you got to treat it like theatre. When you go and watch wrestling, you're not going to watch a real fight. If you wanted to do that, go and watch MMA or a boxing match. You're going to watch theatre. It's meant to be theatre. It's about getting emotion from the crowd and about storytelling. That's what good wrestlers do.
The question I was going to ask you says about entertainment. It's about show business. It's almost creating a narrative. The thing I was going to ask you is initially you wrestled under your own name, Joel Pettyfer, and then you created the character of Joel Redman. I just wanted you to tell me how you kind of came up with the character, and does he kind of have a backstory, and how would you kind of describe your backstory and who you are and your kind of wrestling style and technique?
I've had many names in the past, I think, but the Redman name, you might remember a wrestler called Steve Blackman, the Lethal Weapon, Steve Blackman. So I was a big fan of him, I think because of the judo. So I just thought,
I do remember him.
Blackman, Redman, that'd be cool. So I just changed my name to Joel Redman. And then it wasn't Joel originally, it was Jules, Joules, like Killer Jules, how you measure power. Terrible name. So it was Jules Redman. And then I think someone called me Joey Redman for a while. I thought, I don't like Joey, it sounds American. So then I think, no, I'll use my real name. I couldn't use Pettyfer for very long because Pettyfer is not a good wrestling name. You know, it's far too soft. So I had to go for Joel Redman in the end. But that's how it was.
And have you always been a babyface wrestler, or has there ever been a period where you've been a heel as well?
I always switch. Like a lot of promotions they'll change me all the time, which is okay. I think sometimes to me, I feel like it's a credit to my ability, maybe in a way. Like they know that I can do either. You know, it doesn't really matter to me. I can be the good guy or the bad guy. Some wrestlers have to be the good guy. You know, they really struggle being a sort of villain. Whereas like I'm quite comfortable doing both. Most of my career has been a good guy. You know, that's been my bread and butter. And it's probably what I'm best at. If you said what's your best style, it's probably being that good guy wrestler. And I'm just a traditional wrestler. I've always loved, like say, Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero. You know, I know it's taboo now, but Chris Benoit was my favorite wrestler as a kid. I just thought he was incredible. Fit Finlay, these kind of guys. So they're the guys that I studied and looked up to, and they were just wrestlers. You know, they weren't really flamboyant or entertainers. They were just pure wrestlers. So that's been my style. That's always been my style. I think the longer you wrestle, be like anything in any kind of entertainment, you have a sort of style that you're good at, and it takes a while to figure that out. And for me, it is that technical style. That's what I do best. I'm not a good promo. I can't talk particularly well. I'm not flamboyant, you know, but I know how to put submissions on people and do reversals. So that's my style, really.
I wanted to move on from kind of singles competition to tag team wrestling. Because you were a former tag champion with Mark Haskins, you worked with on many occasions. And I kind of want to ask you, this may come across as a bit of a stupid question, but how does tag team wrestling differ from solo wrestling without kind of stating the obvious? And which performers have you most enjoyed teaming up with in tag team competition over the years?
Who have I most enjoyed? I mean, Haskins is always good. Me and Mark Haskins, we lived together for years in Portsmouth. So we were kind of like brothers. So we would work really well together because we probably have the same mindset and we kind of think along the same wavelength. However, when you live with someone and you're that close with someone, there's always going to be arguments. You could be at each other's throats quite a lot. But he's a phenomenal wrestler. So I mean, to be tagging with him was good. Obviously, Pac, you know, like Adrian Neville's a good guy to tag with just because he's phenomenal in what he does. So just being able to be with him and watch what he does that close up is pretty cool. Charlie Sterling, who is a Bath native, so he's near to you. He's really good to tag with just because Charlie, when he started, I didn't train him, but he traveled with me a lot and I sort of took him under my wing a little bit and helped mentor him in his early days. So tagging with him is good because I know a lot of the stuff he does is things that I've told him years ago that he's picking up on now and that he's starting to implement in his own style. So anyone that I've sort of trained or mentored a bit is always fun to tag with because you can kind of help them just make sure they're doing things right and just bring them up to another level.
Would a tag match compared to, say, a singles match, would it need to be more choreographed in a way or more planned? Because obviously, you know, there's more people involved, or if it's a triple tag match or so on.
It depends who it is, it depends who's in the tag. I always prefer doing singles because I know I can, I don't like to pan very much, just I've probably got a bad memory, from concussions or something, but I don't remember a lot of stuff. So normally when I wrestle there might be a few little bits that have been choreographed that we know what we're doing, but a lot of it is just off the cuff, just reacting to each other. Whereas in a tag team match, you can't do that because there's 4 people. So there's a lot of time when you're not in the ring. So it's very hard you can tell the referee information to tell to them, but it doesn't always get to them. So quite often I can be in a tag team match with 3 guys that are a bit inexperienced. I'm trying to lead it. It's really quite tricky because you're trying to pass information to people without actually being in the ring. So that can be quite challenging. So tag team matches, it just completely depends who you're in there with. There's people that I wrestle in England that I won't even speak to before I go out. There's a guy called James Mason, who's the best wrestler in Europe by a mile and has been for the last 20 years. And we don't even talk, with the wrestling each other. It's just, we just get in the ring and do it. We don't even know who's going to win. They'll normally tell us in the ring, like, James is winning. We'll work out our way into the finish, But that's someone I've wrestled a lot of times. So it just depends who you're working with.
I wanted to move on and go back in time to, I believe, 2012, when you signed with the WWE's development territory called NXT, under the wrestling name Oliver Gray. I just wanted to ask how that contract came about and the experience of living and working in the USA. And how do you look back at your time with the company when you kind of reminisce and look back at that period?
I had a couple of tryouts. The first tryout didn't go very well. The second tryout for me was more comfortable. They just get in the ring and wrestle and show intensity, which at the time I could do quite well. So the second trial went really well. They had me wrestle a guy called Jamie Noble for about 20 minutes or 30 minutes, something stupid. He gave me the nod and said, "Yeah, give this guy a job." It was the same one that Paige got signed at. It's been the film. I think it's Fighting With My Family. The tryout in that film is the same tryout that I was signed on. So that was really cool. And then after I got signed up, I walked up the rampway. It was like a SmackDown or a Raw or something. We walked up to the gorilla position. Triple H is there. And they said, "Oh, Paul, I'd like you to meet Joel." And he said, "Oh, welcome to the family," and shook hands. And that was a good moment. And then I remember getting backstage, being able to call my dad actually backstage and just say to him, because like I say, they were always supportive of me. They're amazing parents. But I think he'd like me to play rugby a bit more. But to be able to call him and say, WWE offered me a job and I'm moving to Florida, was a really nice moment for me and for him, probably, just to show him that it was worth it. All this sort of damage that I put on my body through is all worth it. So that was good. Florida and America, I enjoyed it. It was good. There's a lot of politics when you go up to those kind of companies. It's quite difficult for me. I'm not a loud person. I'm very reserved and quiet, and that probably comes across as rude sometimes. And it's not rude. It's just that's my nature. And that might be from being a farm boy and sort of growing up in the countryside. I'm just not loud. I really struggle to be loud with people. And some Americans are very loud. And I think they'll sort of chant when the trainer comes in the room and they're shouting and screaming and things. And they see that as being people that really want to be there. And I don't want to be there because I'm being quiet. But it's not that way. It's just that's who I am. I think with the English people are like that anyway. We just sit there and we do like to observe the situation, before we make a move on people. But so yeah, it was a good experience, and to win those belts was really good. It's a good moment to have, and I enjoyed it. I don't look back at it fondly. It's not a time in my life that I'm particularly fond of, just because I was on a skyrocket for the first 6 months and about to go up to the sort of main roster, and then sort of tore my knee, got injured badly, sat out for 9 months and couldn't wrestle, and from there it all just kind of tumbled downhill. And that was for me having a bad attitude and just not being old enough to really deal with the injury. So I don't look back at it fondly. I look back at it as a negative, just because I think I let myself down really, and I should have done more with the opportunities I was given. But it's hindsight, you can't change it.
I wanted to ask you how the wrestling scene over there differs to the UK, and also talk about kind of cultural differences. And did you find, you say that the English tend to be quite well-mannered, we tend to be quite patient, I suppose conservative with a small c. Did you find in America you were dealing with kind of a lot of egos?
Yeah, I imagine so, maybe. don't know. It's just weird. So people be very protective in that company, especially in developmental, because you're all fighting to get up to the main road. So it is kind of dog eat dog a little bit. I mean, I got there on a Monday and they put me on show on the Saturday, and I was straight on the live events. And I remember there was a guy called Brad Maddox who wrestled there for a bit, and he tried to lay in a little bit in the match, and I sort of gave it back to him because I know when someone's trying to take the piss. And he came back kicking and screaming, and the coaches had been watching the monitors. They were like, "Oh no, you hit him first. He just gave you what we call as a receipt," and it all calmed down. So that was that kind of behaviour, and a lot of the wrestlers there were quite hard to deal with, and they wouldn't shake my hand and stuff when I first turned up. They saw me as a threat, and it's that kind of environment when I first went there. But when I went there, it was FCW, so it was like maybe 25 or 30 people in developmental. Whilst I was there, it changed to NXT, and then you had 110 or 120 people there. It was a very different atmosphere. But yeah, I mean, as a cultural thing, America, I mean, I don't know. It's probably a nice place to live. I didn't particularly like it. I mean, Florida, it's great in the winter, but in the summer it's too hot. Like, it's just horrible and muggy, and yeah, I don't know. It's just like I said, I'm a farm boy, so these big cities is too much for me. I don't like that many people around me. I like to be a bit more on my own.
I've never lived in America, but kind of my little experience of going there on vacation is we speak the same language, but there seems to be massive, to me, like cultural differences, which are quite sort of obvious, I think. Yeah. I kind of wanted to move on from America to Japan, because I kind of get the impression that you've got a big fondness for wrestling in Japan and the country itself. I want to ask you about your experience over there, and how does working on the Japanese wrestling circuit differ to your experiences in America and here in the UK?
If I could speak the language and read the food menus, I'd move there in a heartbeat. I could order a couple of beers, but that's about as far as my Japanese goes. It's so hard to understand. And the writing, I could never read Japanese. It's impossible. But as a country, it's just absolutely incredible. No, I really can't tell you enough. And I just love how sort of disciplined it is, and just how friendly people are there and how polite it is. And it's just such a nice country to be in. I mean, a lot of people want to live in America, and America's nice, and to say you lived in Florida is cool, but Japan's a much nicer country. If you ever get the chance to go there, it's a much better place to go. And the style of wrestling for me is great because, like I said, I don't like planning very much. When you work for WWE, they're sort of telling you like everything you got to do in your match. So everything is planned out. They're counting you down to ad breaks. They're telling you which cameras to be looking at which time. In Japan, a lot of the boys there don't speak any English, so it's impossible for me to go back there and plan a match with them because they don't speak English. So it is just getting there and wrestle, and it's just sort of like almost like real wrestling, and I just really enjoy that side of it.
I wanted to talk about the audience side, the audience as fans, and helping to kind of will on the wrestlers. Is there a different kind of appreciation in Japan for wrestling and wrestlers than kind of
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know you watched and I like the Chaos shows in Bristol. We talked about them before we came on the air, and they were really good fun. But it's a good example of that is my first tour of Japan. Before my first tour of Japan, my last match in England was for Chaos. It was me, Mark Haskins, and Dick Riley in a triple threat match. Worked our bollocks off. And all I can remember is whilst I was wrestling, the crowd was heckling me because I was going bold, because I've got a big bold patch on my head. And I thought, I'm putting my body on the line for 20 minutes and all you care about is I'm going bold. And then you go to Japan and they sit there in silence. And every now and again, you'll get a little round of applause, and it's like very, very polite. But they shouldn't be shouting. Or, I just get an occasional Redman from the crowd. It would just be complete contrasting crowds. Not always for the better. English fans are fantastic because you get a really good atmosphere. But the Japanese crowds, it's just, they're so polite and they don't want to make a lot of noise. They don't want to be rude. And it's very different.
I wanted to move on to your take on modern wrestling compared to the old. I guess depending on when you were born and when you grew up watching wrestling, I suppose for some, a certain era is better than others. For me, like the peak period for me was like the 80s and 90s, and I talk about WWF. for me, because that was kind of the era I kind of grew up in and watched it and bought the figures. But how do you think modern wrestling differs to wrestling of the old, say 30, 40 years ago? And do you watch some of the big promotions? If so, which ones? And do you prefer that than the small kind of independent circuits? Or what's kind of what do you like to watch as kind of when you're away from wrestling, putting yourself in kind of a fan's position or the audience?
I don't watch a lot of wrestling because my partner's not a big wrestling fan. But if I watch anything, I watch AEW probably more. I find that a bit more exciting. I do try and watch the WWE product now. I try to watch Survivor Series every day, but I think I started trying to watch the men's Survivor Series match, and halfway through I just turned it off. It just wasn't for me. I don't know with wrestling. I feel like the style now is amazing. I'm not knocking any of the boys that do it now because they're phenomenal athletes. But sometimes especially with AEW, you're watching it just to see the next big move. You're not there. You don't care who wins. You don't even got a good guy and a bad guy. You're just watching it to go, I want to see if he can do 4 backflips off the top rope rather than 3. And that's not what wrestling is to me. Wrestling, like I said before, is theatre. It's about getting emotion. It's about having a good guy and a bad guy and someone who wants to win. And I think when you watch that 90s and you watch, say, Rock and Austin or something, when they were wrestling each other, one guy was the baddie and one was the goodie, and you didn't really care about the moves. You just wanted to see Stone Cold kick the Rock's ass at WrestleMania, and that was all that mattered, and that was what made it so entertaining to us as kids. But so that's where it's changed. But then the style, it's amazing acrobatics they're doing now. I just hope no one gets hurt. Whenever you watch it, you just think they're so close to someone getting really badly hurt. I don't know if you need to risk that much. Sometimes you can get a reaction from a crowd without doing quite such dangerous stuff. But
talking about injuries, you mentioned some of the risks modern day wrestlers take in the ring. Have you sustained some serious injuries over the years during your career?
I tore my ACL in my knee in America, so that was bad. And then I've tore a lot of the meniscus inside, so that's been removed. I tore my MCL in my other knee in Japan, but it was a small tear, I think. It was up in the North Island, Hokkaido, and it was sort of real snowy and stuff, and I was sort of hobbling around. I didn't want to let them know I was injured, so I managed to tape it up, and I keep wrestling for a few more matches. I managed to get for another week, and then it started moving a bit, and managed to get away with that one. I've got like a hairline fracture in my neck from a guy doing a backflip to the outside on me and just caught me straight on the head, and just I couldn't move my body for a while. So I was getting a lot of pain in my hands and arms and stuff. I just managed to control that a little bit now. And then the vertebrae in my lower back is sort of eroded. So I was getting a lot of sciatica. But again, it's all stuff that, I've never had any major surgeries apart from my knee. And you can kind of, with your training in the gym and stuff, you can strengthen certain areas. And I know what stuff to avoid. And there's certain moves I just won't do because I know that's going to hurt me, So I have to try and be a bit more careful with what I'm doing.
Outside of wrestling, you're a family man. I want to congratulate you on your son being born only a couple of days ago. But I kind of wanted to ask you, when you were away from wrestling, what are kind of your interests? What are the things that you're really into when you're outside of the wrestling ring, and things you kind of enjoy?
Well, yeah, the gym, obviously, but every wrestler should go to the gym. That's kind of part of the job. What else do I enjoy? We just like getting outside. I'm an outside kind of person, so I can't watch daytime TV or be sat inside. So we're always out going for a walk somewhere, or we live in Salisbury now, so it's a really nice place to live. So that's a real nice place to go and take long walks and stuff. So that's probably my hobbies. I don't have much time for it. So I've always worked a full-time job and wrestled. I've never just wrestled. So I work 40 hours. I wrestle a couple of shows a week. I teach at the Rev Pro School in Portsmouth on Wednesdays. I run my own wrestling schools on Saturdays. So it's just kind of juggling everything. But then, my parents were farmers. They worked every day. So I'm used to being a kid, seeing my parents work every day. So it feels normal to me. But I'm kind of always on the road or working. But
I wanted to ask you said a joy for the outdoors, and obviously being brought up on a farm and in a rural kind of landscape. But I wanted to ask you about being a forester, a kind of a bit bit of background on how that sort of came about, and was that something you enjoyed?
Yeah, I loved it. It's just bloody hard work. You know, a lot of my family's farm is woodland, so about 70% is woodland. So my dad's got big sawmills, and he sort of distributes timber to different companies and stuff. So it's like a family business. So when I was younger, I just had a chainsaw license, and I went and worked with a friend of mine, and we'd just go off to these woods and fell trees, and we sort of cut down the trees and do that forestry work, which I really enjoyed. You know, I loved it, but it's just bloody hard work. You try and do 10 hours of that and then go and hit the gym afterwards. It's really tough. But it works out well. But when they signed me to WWE, to my wrestling, I guess they like my wrestling, and they called me out the ring and they said, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I'm a forester." And they didn't understand what I was. I think they called it obviously a lumberjack in America. So I said, "Oh, I'm a lumberjack." And I saw their eyes sort of light up. And luckily, they didn't give me a lumberjack gimmick, but they kind of, it was something different. If I said, "Oh, I work in Tesco's," it might not have had the same appeal as, "Oh, okay, he's a lumberjack." So it's quite cool. It's something we can work with here.
I want to come back briefly to wrestling. Over the years, you've worked for a number of wrestling promotions. Do you have a particular favorite, and do you have a particular standout moment at this point in your career, and any standout matches?
My favorite company to work for is AllStar Wrestling, who've been running for 51 years in England. And that's just because when I was a kid, I watched them live. And then, like I said, as a teenager, I'd go and do the odd job here and there. And it was just another level to anywhere else. So when I came back from America, Brian Dixon, who runs AllStar, just contacted me and said, "Would you come and work for us full time?" And I just went on the road for him full time. And I've been there full time now for 8 years. And it's just, to me, it's just the ultimate place to wrestle. You know, we'll do like 10 show runs. We just wrestle every day for 10 days. And there's nowhere else probably in England or in Europe that you could do that. And I just love wrestling there. So that is my home company. You know, there's nothing more special to me than AllStar. In terms of moments in my career, I mean, I guess winning the NXT tag belts, but then, yeah, I guess I never really watched that much WWF as a kid. So, I mean, it wasn't too big a deal. Winning the AllStar Heavyweight Championship was probably the biggest thing. Just because I never thought I'd ever win that as a kid. You know, that was just way beyond me. So having his championship belt he had it for 2 years, was a big deal. And then matches that stand out. There's a match with a guy called Nomura from All Japan in Osaka. It's like a 10-minute match, but that's probably my favorite match I've ever had. Again, he didn't speak much English, so we said to get in there and wrestle, but he played rugby for a long time in Japan, so we kind of had that mutual understanding, and it just clicked. And that was my first tour for All Japan, and that was the match that I think kind of made people's eyes open up a little bit. And he just let me do that European style and wrestle the way I wanted to wrestle. And Akiyama, the boss there, kind of was like, "Oh, this guy's got something." And you know, the rest of that year, I was offered like another 5 more tours. So I was there all the time in Japan. So I mean, that was a really big match for me. I can't really think of any others. I mean, I've had loads of good matches, but you know, that one match in particular, I just always, if someone said, "Oh, let me see you wrestle," I'd probably put that match on, because I just feel that it's the best match I've ever had, probably.
Coming back to your personal and your private life, we mentioned at the beginning your son was born only a couple of days ago. Your partner, Michelle, gave birth. What's it like being a father? And do you intend to take a little break away from wrestling? And my kind of other question alongside that was, what does the future hold for you?
So I've taken a sort of month off now. So I'm going to wrestle on Saturday in Tiverton, which is my hometown. I'm doing that because the guy called the UK Dominator, who's from down that area, it's his retirement match. So I don't want to miss that. I want to be in there for him. And then I'm doing another one in Bristol, in Hanham, on the 18th. But I did make it quiet November, December, just have a bit more time with Michelle and baby Ted. I didn't want to be wrestling too much. What does the future hold? I don't know. I'm just going to keep wrestling as long as I can. You know, I feel like I'm probably going to do a bit less from now on, because I just want to be with him. I don't want to miss any time of his life. And, you know, my son Ralph was born when I moved to America. I didn't come home for 2 years, so I missed all his upbringing. You know, and I see him not on a regular basis now, and it's always been very difficult. I kind of feel like it was a bit of a cock up for me. It was a cock up for me, and I don't want to make that mistake twice. I've done that once already, so it's important for me now to be around and watch Ted grow up and be there for him, and not make the same mistake I made previously. So I probably won't do quite as much. I'll try and maybe pick and choose a bit more on what I do wrestling wise. I'm running the wrestling school in Salisbury. We just train on mats, but I've got a really good group of guys. They're all active wrestlers already that come to me, so they already know what they're doing. It's just like a finishing school almost. So I'd like to make that bigger. I'd like to get a little unit and get the ring up and stuff, and make a good go of that, and try and get sort of beginners in as well that I can teach, because I do enjoy training people. And that's probably the long-term goal, just to try and get that up and running properly. But we'll see. If a contract came through the door for a big company for lots of money, then I'm sure it might change my mind, but we'll see what happens.
Shortly, we move on to the final set of questions that we ask every Your Take guest, and we always have some quite amusing and interesting mix of answers. But my final question is, there's going to be people listening and watching this interview, and obviously youngsters who watch wrestling on a regular basis, televised, they go to live events perhaps. And my question was, and they obviously play, we mentioned at the beginning, they play wrestling in the playground and so on. But anyone who really wants to become a wrestler and pursue a career similar to yours today, what would be kind of what would you say to them? What would your advice be, having done it for the best part of 20 odd years?
Come to Salisbury, come to my wrestling school. Find a good school, and don't go to the school that's nearest to you, and don't go to a school just because it's by a big company. Look at who the trainer is. That's all that matters, really. When you're looking to learn to wrestle, it's who's going to be teaching you. Because there's a lot of wrestling schools in England. And no way would I want to knock any of the schools. But some of them, the people that are teaching, probably haven't got the experience to be teaching yet. They probably had maybe 200 matches, 150 matches. I've never counted my matches, but I would imagine they're around 3,000. And I've been to a lot of different places. So what I can teach is a very varied style. So I lost you for a second.
Back now.
So I would definitely say just try and find a good school, find a good coach, do your research on them, on that person, find out what they've done in the business, if they've done anything, or if they've been taught by anyone good. So that's very important. Probably get an education first, because it's so difficult to make it successful in wrestling, and the wrestling bit's fun. Someone told me when I started, they said you get paid for the traveling, you don't get paid to wrestle. And it's stuck with me forever since. I would wrestle for free, any day of the week, because I love wrestling. But sometimes when you sat in your car and you're driving to Carlisle or something to do a show, that's what you're getting paid for. You're getting paid for all that nonsense. You're not getting paid for the wrestling. So that's really important. Just realize that it's a really difficult business, and it takes its toll on you. And you're going to miss a lot of sort of special moments. Like for me, my son growing up, I missed that. So there's a lot of things that you are going to miss. In terms of wrestlers now, if they're young wrestlers that are wrestling, it's really hard. I'm sure other people that you spoke to in entertainment will say the same thing. There's this balance between doing the wrestling and your real life and that personal life. So whether that's my life with Michelle and wrestling, and you've got to juggle both. Too many people just get obsessed with the wrestling and they neglect the things that really matter. And your family, whether it be your partner, your kids, your mum and dad, they're the things that really matter. So always have time for them. If it means missing the show to take Michelle away for a weekend, just miss the show. It ain't going to affect you that much. So that would be a really important bit of information for people, I think, just to don't obsess with wrestling. Remember the more important things in life.
This is the bit I always enjoy. We come on to the last quickfire, the 13 questions in total. Don't think about them too in any great deal, but just finding out kind of things you like, things you don't like, favorite curse word, and so on. Okay, so number one, what would you say is your favorite pastime?
The gym. That's boring, isn't it? Oh. Yeah, the gym. Sorry about that.
Number two, we move from pastimes to cinema. What would you say is your favourite film and why?
My favourite film is, I think it's called The Next 3 Days of Russell Crowe, and he's trying to break his wife out of jail. God knows why. I don't think it's not even a particularly good film. I just love that film. I could watch it all the time. I think it's really good. I like the story, but hey, that's my favourite film.
Russell Crowe now to books. Who would you say is your favourite novelist?
I only read wrestling books, and Michelle has got on my case about trying to read something a bit more intellectual, but I've read a hell of a lot of wrestling autobiographies. If you said my favourite wrestling autobiography, probably Bret Hart's. I mean, I know that's quite a common one, but this autobiography is fantastic. And I really want to read Dynamite Kids, but it's just really bloody expensive. It's like 30 quid for a second-hand copy, but I will read that at some point. William Regal's is good too. Anything that's a British wrestler who's made it in America, I always find interesting because it's, he feels similar to anything, the British guy.
Dynamite Kid, he was an interesting character, wasn't
he?
Did
you watch his Dark Side of the Ring? That Dark Side of the Ring documentary on him was really good. Yeah, he's very interesting, but he's a pioneer, he changed the business completely. But obviously he had his demons, but I'd love to read his book. So I'm gonna spend the money and get that book at some point. Pat Patterson's a really good book as well. Enjoyed that too.
If you could have had a different profession outside of wrestling, what would it have been and why?
I'd probably be doing forestry work, I imagine, or I'd be on the farm. Or like as a kid, like I said, I wanted to be a marine biologist, but I never would have done that, I think. But that was the reason I wanted to do that. I'm sure I'd be doing forestry. I'm sure I'd be in the middle of some wood somewhere, soaking wet with a chainsaw in my hand, I imagine. But
from another dream job now to who in life would you say has been your greatest inspiration?
It's my granddad, just to have gone from, like I say, being born in India and sent back to England and just doing so well at Cambridge and getting that degree in maths and sort of rowing for Cambridge rowing team, just to be offered those jobs in these offices in London for lots and lots of money, but he had a passion for farming, so he didn't do that, and he went and bought this sort of marshland of a farm, and he started dating the other farmer's daughter, and all the farmers hated him because he was this guy from London, and he used to meet up with her in the middle of the night and stuff in the fields. And that's just my idol, because that to me was the same with me in wrestling. I just pursued this, it was like a dream that you have. And if you work hard and you want to do it, it'll be successful. And my family don't have a mortgage. It's all been paid off. The farm's worth a lot of money, and it's all because of him, because he had the bollocks to sort of turn all those jobs down and just get down there and buy this sort of bit of marshland and make it into a farm.
Is he still alive, your granddad?
No, he died 6 months after Ralph was born, so 8 years ago, 9 years ago now. Yeah, which is a shame, but he never met Michelle, which is a shame. I wish he'd met Michelle, but yeah, he was a really great man.
From your granddad, he was your greatest inspiration now to newspapers. Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
No, I don't read a newspaper. I look on the BBC website sometimes if I want to see about coronavirus. Maybe I look on that. But
you're a wise man not reading a newspaper. That makes two of us. What is your favourite food?
Moussaka is my favourite food. Yeah, that's what I go to.
Who in life would you say is your favourite cultural icon?
And so I looked at these, probably breaking the kayfabe for you now. I looked at these questions because you sent them to me on an email.
Yeah. And
I was saying to Michelle, there's a lot of people I can name here, and this is really going to come across bad. I love watching Donald Trump. Not in any way do I agree with a lot of stuff he says. As a character, I find him absolutely hilarious. So yeah, as a character, I like watching his interviews.
From a straight talking man, now we're looking for your favourite curse word and why. What would you say is your favourite curse word?
I don't swear. I'm they're very, very light swear words if I ever do swear. A lot of the wrestling boys know that too, so they make a point of swearing around me. But I just never have. I couldn't even use blasphemy when I was a kid. I'd get a smack around the back of the head for using blasphemy. So I don't have a favourite swear word. I will not tolerate the C word though. That's one thing I hate. If I hear someone say that, it's a bad thing to be saying.
What would you say is your favourite place or holiday destination?
It's probably going to be Japan if you're saying place. And probably Osaka is my favourite place. I've been in Japan. but any sort of destination just by the coast, just like by the sea, you know, like we live in Salisbury, so to go down to sort of Bournemouth and Christchurch and sort of Mudderford and that area is where we normally go. If we just want to go for a day out, we go down there because it's a real nice sort of coastal walks and just being by the coast. So that's my favourite sort of place to be, or just being on the farm, you know, just being away from everybody.
Yeah, I vouch for Bournemouth as well. I worked down there for 6 months, and it was one of the best times of my life, to be honest.
Just
really nice place.
That coastland, and if you're going sort of like Weymouth and stuff, and that sort of area, yeah, it's really nice down there.
One of my passions is music, so I'm interested to find out your favourite music artist and what is your favourite album.
I don't know about the album. I couldn't get that at all. My favourite artist is Van Morrison. I'm just a massive Van Morrison fan. I think maybe because my mum was, I don't know, but Van Morrison, James Taylor, I'm a real big fans of. So I mean, that's probably if I could listen, if you said I could only have one person to listen to the rest of my life, it'd be Van Morrison, probably.
Two good artists you've mentioned and great songwriters as well.
Yeah.
What would you next say is your greatest achievement to date?
Both my sons. The birth of both my sons, definitely. Yeah, can't beat that.
Really lovely answer, and probably the hardest question of the lot. How do you wish to be remembered?
To be a good dad to Ted is probably the most important thing to me now. Just not to be a dickhead, you know. Especially in the wrestling business, that's what I just don't want, you know, because you get a lot of that sometimes. You can get a lot of egos and a lot of nasty people. I just want to be there to help people and see other people succeed. So to be a good person is what you want to be remembered as, I think. In terms of the wrestling business, I always wanted to be a wrestler's wrestler. So I never wanted to be particularly big on social media or massively popular with the fans, but I just wanted the wrestlers in the back to know, yeah, he's good. You know, if he goes out to the ring, he's good. Or if I'm wrestling him, he's top level. That was really important to me.
We end the interview with the final bell, no pun intended. I just wanted to thank you. I'm slightly envious in some ways because you're the first wrestler we've had on Your Take, but also I got to be honest, like if I had a bucket list, me and a friend constantly say that one thing we would love to do is just have 1 or 2 wrestling matches. And we're mad. We kind of cut promos and send them to one another, but it's something I've always enjoyed wrestling. I've got a lot of time for the wrestlers and what they do. I think, like you say, it's an incredible show. It's good fun. It's a laugh. Storylines are fantastic. And I've got a great respect for you guys doing what you do, putting yourselves at risk and always putting on such a good show for fans. And I know so many people, they just love the shows, and you can see young families, adults, old people. It's just
one of those things with wrestling where, like, you know, and you did mention it in the interview, but obviously a lot of people, when I say I'm a wrestler, that, you know, in my everyday life, it's always that fake wrestling, you know, and you get that comment all the time that it's fake, and it's never really annoyed me too much. I know why wrestlers do get annoyed by it, but it's really hard to explain to people that if it was, when you go, I always say, when you go and watch theatre, is it fake? You said no. So, well, why is wrestling any different? It's not like it's not CGI. You know, if I get picked up and body slammed, I get picked up and body slammed. It's not a soft ring. You know, it's still going to hurt. So it's it's weird really that you get that mentality from people, but it's nice that you appreciate it and you appreciate it for what it is. But in terms of yourself, it's never too late. You know, if you want to start wrestling, I'm sure I've got some spandex trunks I can send to you in the post to you.
I'm not sure I get into them, to be honest. I'm not kind of that slender these days. So yeah, there's a little bit.
Neither am I, so I'm sure you'll be fine.
Yeah, but in fairness, you work out and you've got a good body, unlike some of us. So yeah. I wanted to thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed your story. I've really enjoyed the interview. Lastly, I know you mentioned, you know, the social media side, but I just wanted to find out where we can find out more information about you, more information about the wrestling school you run, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So my Twitter is Joel Redman Pro. You can find me on Twitter. Instagram is j.redman87. You can find me on there if you want. Facebook, I try and keep that personal. So that's normally so that people that I actually know rather than fans. And then the wrestling school, we are on Instagram, ASW South. And then it's on Facebook. It's a Facebook group. I think it's called AllStar South Little Line Wrestling Training. So join that and you can find all the information about the school. We're very fortunate that we sort of asked Brian Dixon, we let us call it AllStar Wrestling South. So it's got that heritage of AllStar Wrestling behind it, which I'm very happy about. But yeah, the wrestling school was in Salisbury. It's a place called My Gym in Salisbury, and we do it on Saturday mornings, 10 a.m. till 12 midday, and it's £10 for the 2 hours. It's just on mats at the moment. We'll have the ring up next year. It's just a lot of conditioning, really, and a lot of amateur wrestling and holds and reversals. But it's a really good place. If you're a young wrestler and you want to come and learn the business, or even if you're a wrestler, you've been doing it for a while and you just want to sharpen up on your sort of mat wrestling technique, it's a really good place to come along. So just drop me a message on any of my contacts and we can make that happen.
And then finally, I just wanted to say, enjoy your little break or for Christmas, and more importantly, enjoy your time with your young son.
Oh yeah, can't wait. When he sleeps, hopefully he'll sleep tonight.
And thanks once again for being a guest on Your Take, and wish you all the very best in the future.
No worries. Thanks, James.